You're listening to Campus Killings, brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, Missing Persons, DNA ID, Scene of the Crime, Zodiac Speaking, Beyond Bizarre True Crime, Below the Surface, and Killer Communications. All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
Hi, Meghan, and hello, listeners. Today's case was recommended by one of our listeners, Michelle T. We want to give a big thank you to her for bringing Kelsey and Matthew's story to our attention, because this case received very little coverage. Most of the news articles surrounding it gave very little information, and there was only one podcast on this case, which was created by a SUNY Geneseo student in 2023. But this podcast was immensely helpful, with interviews from all the victims' family and friends, so most of our information for today's episode is from the podcast. It's called 32-23, Remembering Kelsey and Matthew. We'll have a link in our show notes for anyone who's looking to do a deeper dive. So, since this case got such little attention, my hope is that by talking about it today, we can help spread the word about Kelsey and Matthew's legacy and broaden the discussion on the importance of mental health in dating relationships. Now, I know this is a topic that we've talked about in some of our recent episodes, but based on how many cases we come across that deal with relationship violence, I think it bears repeating.
I think so too.
Yeah. But before we get to all that, let's take a look at the university where Kelsey and Matthew were students, and that is SUNY Geneseo. Established in 1871 as the Geneseo Normal and Training School, like many of the other colleges we've covered on the show, the school began more as a specialized high school for students looking to be teachers, and it would stay that way for almost a century. But in 1962, the Normal School became part of the State University of New York and became a 4-year liberal arts college under the SUNY banner. Today, the school is one of SUNY's honor colleges accepting academically high-performing students. And it's a fairly small school at around only 4,000 students, which leads to smaller class sizes and better student-professor mentorships. And its beautiful brick-lined pathways and ivy-covered buildings are a huge draw for students. Many students say that SUNY Geneseo feels like home the first time that they arrive. And while it may not have been one young woman's first choice in colleges, Kelsey Annese understood that sentiment only days after moving into her freshman dorm.
Yeah, I remember SUNY Geneseo was on my list.
Oh, really?
I applied to a number of SUNY schools, but the only thing was I really wanted our mid-sized school. It was a little too small for me.
Gotcha. It's similar. I'm assuming that's SUNY Geneseo is similar in size to our school.
Very, yep,
yeah,
exactly.
Okay. All right. Okay, so Kelsey was born in Webster, New York in 1998, and she was the middle child with an older brother and a younger sister. While her parents divorced when she was small, she reportedly had a good relationship with both of them, though she was especially close with her mother. Kelsey also had several cousins who lived nearby, and she grew up in a large, rambunctious family, where even from a young age she was described as determined and goal-oriented. She was also extremely creative, and her cousins remember her coming up with one-act plays that she would direct all the other kids to star in, and they would perform this for the grown-ups. I'm assuming you did that as well, right? Like, I feel like that's such a cousin thing to do.
Yes, definitely.
All right, she became interested in sports around middle school, and while her parents said that she was good at everything, from academics to singing, sports were really where she shined. Her mother recalled that she tried literally every sport that the school offered over the course of her elementary and middle school years. And she excelled in many of them, but basketball stood out as the sport that she really loved. And it's possible this was in her DNA because her father had been a basketball player in college, and he often took his 3 children to the basketball courts to teach them about the game.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, he would recall that Kelsey was the only one who was really interested, and she became obsessed with the sport after her mother signed the children up at a local YMCA. And by 5th grade, Kelsey had decided that basketball was her sport and that she wanted to be on a team. And her school did not have a basketball team, but her mother got her a spot on a traveling team where she would play for the next 7 years. By high school, Kelsey's coach described her as the best player on his team, as well as the most encouraging and leader-like player that he had ever had. But she wasn't just good on the court, she was also an incredible student. She particularly loved learning languages, and by the end of high school, she was fluent in Spanish. And she wanted to use this skill in her career path, so when she initially was looking at colleges, she wanted to go somewhere that had a strong international relations program. And she had applied to Geneseo as a backup school because both of her parents were alumni, but she really had her heart set on Tufts or Middlebury. Unfortunately, she was rejected by her top choices, so she decided that she would go ahead and enroll at Geneseo. And while she was initially disappointed to only get into her safe school, her mother reported that when she went to visit Kelsey for Parents' Weekend, Kelsey had absolutely fallen in love with the school. She had a great roommate and already made several friends. She loved walking the tree-lined avenues and taking classes in the beautiful buildings. And while she didn't try out for the school's Division III basketball team her freshman year, by sophomore year, she realized how much she missed being part of a team sport. So she did a very hard thing, which was to enter as a walk-on, which basically meant that she was walking into an already established team. But this didn't deter her, and her coaches later described her as the glue of the program, leading by example to make all of her teammates the best players they could be.
Gosh, she really sounds like just like a bright, shining star for real.
Yeah. We say this all the time, but almost every single case we cover are these incredible, incredible students.
Which makes it so much worse, you know?
Yep.
Such potential.
Yes. Oh, and another thing about her playing basketball, she honored her father's legacy as a Geneseo basketball star by taking his jersey number 32 as her own.
Oh.
And while she was making history on the court, she also found her first love.
And now, a brief word from our sponsors.
While her friends and family don't recall exactly how Kelsey met Colin Kingston, her mother remembered that Colin was also a basketball player. Kelsey had shared the court with him for practice sessions, and his sports background was hugely attractive to Kelsey. The two started dating at the beginning of Kelsey's sophomore year, and over the course of the next 2 years, Colin visited with Kelsey's family on a number of occasions. Kelsey's mother recalled him being a nice guy who clearly loved her daughter, and she found him to be very polite and respectful.
Wait, Amy, so he went to the school? Yes or no?
He did go to the school, correct.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Kelsey's mother did notice that he seemed to get a bit overwhelmed by their large, boisterous family during holiday gatherings. She just assumed that Colin was shy and introverted. But despite Colin's good personality, Kelsey's mother did not see their relationship turning into anything permanent.
Why is that, Amy?
I'm not exactly sure, but Colin came from a prominent family in Geneseo Village, and he seemed to favor a homebound, traditional kind of lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
While Kelsey came from a blended family, she loved traveling, and it seemed like she was looking for possibly more of a worldly existence than Colin.
Okay.
And so her mom quickly saw that Kelsey seemingly wanted a lot more from life than Colin did. But even before this became apparent to Kelsey, Colin allegedly cheated on her at some point during their first year together.
Oh.
As a result, she broke up with him immediately, but he apologized profusely, saying that he made a huge mistake and that it wouldn't happen again. And Kelsey decided to give him a second chance.
Mm.
Now, Kelsey's mother believed that the reason why she gave him a second chance is because she really loved Colin's family. And Colin's father had been very helpful to her with fixing her car, giving her rides to school. She also became very close with Colin's younger sisters. So it seemed that Going back to him meant that she would still be able to be a part of his family, whom she really enjoyed being with.
Right.
But as we often see, the relationship did not get better after they got back together, and by Kelsey's junior year, they had broken up a second time. It seems that she had finally realized what her mother had seen early on. These two were simply not a good fit for each other.
Why did they break up this time? Was there another cheating, or was there like a big fight about something?
I'm not exactly sure, but I can tell you that at this time, Colin had dropped out of Geneseo, and it seemed that he started to monopolize Kelsey's time, which left her little energy to maintain her friendships, and that started to really bother her. So she felt that it was best if they parted ways and found other people.
Okay.
But Colin was incredibly upset at the breakup, and only a few days later, Kelsey told her mom that she was thinking about getting back together with him again. She said it was hard to deal with the fact that she was making him so sad.
Oh, so he's just guilting her.
Yeah. And while her mother cautioned her against this, Kelsey decided to go ahead and try a third time.
Oh, boy.
She and Colin allegedly had a conversation in which Kelsey laid out a plan for how they could have a better relationship together. Some of these points involved Kelsey being adamant that she was going to make time for her friends and that Colin needed to re-enroll and finish his degree. This seems like healthy boundaries that she's trying to set.
Yeah, it's true.
But despite Colin agreeing to the plan, only a few months later, Kelsey realized that no amount of planning would make Colin a good fit for her, and their relationship slowly deteriorated over the fall semester of her senior year. Kelsey's mom recalled that the two did not share the holidays together for the first time in 3 years, and by New Year's of 2016, things were done for good.
Oh, okay.
But this time, Colin didn't just plead with her to take him back. He began threatening self-harm. Kelsey immediately called his family to let them know that he was struggling, but she was adamant, despite Colin's constant begging and continued threats on his own life, that she was not interested in getting back together. And it's unclear whether his family followed up with him after Kelsey said something or whether or not they tried to get him help. But Colin was apparently so distraught that he even texted Kelsey's mom after the breakup, asking if he could get some advice. And she actually replied that she was happy to talk, but Colin had never called her.
Gosh, okay.
Now, while Colin was desperately trying to get Kelsey back, she had well and truly moved on. Shortly after the breakup, Kelsey rekindled a friendship with a Geneseo hockey player and geography major that she had met freshman year. Matt Hutchinson, an international student from Canada, had apparently always liked Kelsey, and when she reached back out to him, he told one of his buddies that he was excited to see where this relationship could possibly go.
Oh, okay.
Known as Hutch, Matt was born in 1991 and raised in Vancouver, Canada with his younger sister. From a young age, Matt's parents described him as curious and introspective, and he had a bit of a goofy side. He loved cooking and baking with his grandmother and followed his dad's passion for cars and working in the garage. As an adult, Matt continued his family's legacy of volunteering by becoming a volunteer firefighter both in Vancouver and later in Geneseo Village. And like Kelsey, Matthew was introduced to sports pretty early on. He started swimming at the age of 4, and by elementary school, he had tried everything from soccer to baseball. But at 8 years old, his father signed him up for inline hockey, and Matthew turned out to be a natural skater. Inline hockey quickly turned to ice hockey, and by 11, he was training daily in skating and boxing. As he continued to play hockey into high school, Matthew became an excellent player, so much so that he was a huge name in the British Columbia Hockey League, which is a top-tier junior league that prepares players for the NCAA.
Oh, wow.
Between 2008 and 2012, Matthew played on several teams and also won an International World Championship in 2012 for Team Canada.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. He became a sought-after player for D1 schools, and while he was personally recruited by Brown University, he ended up deciding that SUNY Geneseo was where he wanted to go. And his parents were a bit hesitant to let him study abroad, but Matthew wanted to see the world. And in the end, after receiving several small scholarships to help with the tuition costs, They agreed to let him go to Geneseo.
Oh, it's like they were hesitant. Oh, it's just so tragic.
He would meet Kelsey in one of his first classes where they ended up working on a group project together. And although the two stayed friendly over their 4 years at college, Kelsey had obviously been with Colin for most of it.
Mm-hmm.
But Matthew's friends recalled that he spent a lot of time over winter break texting someone whom they assumed was Kelsey.
Okay.
But none of their friends really knew what was going on between the two of them at the start of the 2016 semester. But there seems to be enough to speculate that they were at the very beginning of a budding romance that January.
Mm-hmm.
Sadly, however, that romance would never have a chance to blossom.
We'll return after a brief word from our sponsors.
At 6:20 a.m. on January 17th of 2016, 911 received a phone call from a Mr. Kingston, who said that his son had just admitted he'd, quote, done harm to his ex-girlfriend and that he was going to harm himself. Only minutes later, first responders arrived at Kelsey's second-floor apartment to find that the back door was unlocked and that there were no signs of forced entry. The house, which had been reconfigured into 4 apartments, were all occupied by Kelsey and 3 of her basketball teammates. Nothing looked amiss when they first entered the apartment, but they soon found her and Matt Hutchinson stabbed to death in her bed.
Ugh.
A third man was slumped nearby, also dead from knife wounds, though they were clearly self-inflicted and the knife was still in his hand.
Oh, my goodness.
He was quickly identified as Colin Kingston, and throughout the rest of the day's interviews with friends and classmates, investigators learned about Kelsey breaking up with him about 2 weeks prior. Several witnesses told detectives that Colin had spent the majority of that time frequenting local bars and telling many of the patrons that he encountered that he wanted to die by suicide.
Mm.
However, he didn't tell any of his family or friends, and while most people in his life knew that he was very upset about the breakup, no one suspected that he was planning anything violent either to others or himself.
Mm-hmm.
But evidence would reveal that Colin had purchased a large kitchen knife which was used to kill Kelsey and Matt the night before.
Okay.
Now, there's very little information available on the crime scene itself, but from what I could find, there were no signs of a struggle, and Kelsey's neighbors didn't hear anything at all from the apartment. So this would lead investigators to believe that Colin had killed the couple in what's known as a blitz attack, possibly while they were asleep.
That's what it sounds like.
Yeah. Geneseo Police Department's public relations officer carefully suggests that Colin may have been experiencing a mental health crisis at the time of the murders, but he would not say anything definitive on the record.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, other than knowing that Colin had no criminal record or history of violent behavior, there's not much publicly available to suggest what his motives were. But here's what we do know. Colin's last full-time semester at Geneseo was the spring of 2013, and he was completely unenrolled by 2014, and that is when he and Kelsey had their second breakup.
Okay.
It's not clear what he was doing instead, but many of Kelsey's friends claimed that he was monopolizing her time during this period. And due to this, none of them had spent enough time around Colin to even really know who he was or how he acted with Kelsey.
So you said he came from a wealthy family, correct?
Yes.
I almost wonder, is he just at home kind of doing nothing? You know what I mean? Like his family has money, so no one's forcing him to do anything. He has no like pro-social attachments and his whole world becomes just her.
It sounds like that, yep.
Yeah.
And we can also see a pattern of behavior in which Kelsey would break up with him, he would beg her to come back, she would feel horrible for hurting him, and they would get back together. Then, when that didn't work anymore, he resorted to threatening suicide and he would harass her via text and phone.
Mm-hmm.
We also know from witness statements that he had spent the week before the murders drinking a lot at the local bars. So perhaps he was intoxicated or under the influence of other substances when he murdered Kelsey and Matt. I do have to say, though, there were no indicators at the scene of this. There's no autopsy results that have been publicly disclosed. I do feel like if an autopsy showed he had drugs or booze in his system, I feel like that would have been all over the news as a possible motive or a mitigating circumstance, and there was no mention of that.
It's possible.
I mean, it seems clear that he had been jealous. He probably found out that Kelsey was sleeping with another man, and he likely snapped. Or it's also possible that he had been escalating abusive behavior over the course of their 3-year relationship.
Yeah.
Now, there's no evidence of this. It is possible that there was abusive behavior and Kelsey just didn't disclose that information to her friends or family.
Well, listen, it's also abusive. We may not say it outright to threaten suicide and to try to manipulate her into staying into the relationship. That's definitely, I would say, abusive in a different way.
Although there were reports that there was no clear motive, I think there seems to be a clear motive. It seems to me that he set out to end Kelsey and Matt's lives when he realized that Kelsey was not coming back. He bought a weapon and he went to the residence.
Yes, I think that's clear motive. It's one of those, I don't know if we're going to talk about at the end, but one of those categories of murder-suicide, the significant negative dynamic in which this is the end result.
Yes. We'll talk. Well, I think we'll definitely have time to talk about that towards the end.
All right.
But regardless of the motive, the tragic fact was that Kelsey and Matt had been murdered and their loss shattered not just their campus, but their hometown communities as well. Since both of them have been so involved in their local sports scenes, their deaths impacted their old coaches and teammates, the younger athletes that they had mentored, and the communities that had cheered them on during the many games they played. And at their college, the grief was also immense. The college's international recruiter spoke in 2023 about how he still struggles with the fact that he was one of the main factors for Matt choosing to attend Geneseo.
Ugh.
And he felt that if he hadn't recruited Matt, then Matt might still be alive. Obviously, no one could have known what was to happen, but this sits with him all the same.
The survivor's guilt.
Yep. Kelsey's college coaches both recalled the shock and grief that overwhelmed them when the dean of students called to tell them that she had been the victim of a murder. They recalled thinking that the police must have made a mistake. Kelsey was too happy and too kind, too good to have someone in her life who wanted her dead. They also said that telling her team that she was gone was one of the hardest things that they ever had to do. Matt's teammates also had a tough time. They couldn't even bring themselves to touch his stall in the locker room for several weeks after his death, and it sat like a shrine to his last game. The school held a memorial for the 2 slain athletes on the Wednesday following their murders. Over 3,000 students, faculty, and the Geneseo community members at large attended a candlelight procession which was led by both the women's basketball team and the men's hockey team. The college also created memorial scholarships in both Kelsey and Matt's names, which are annually awarded to incoming students who emulate the athletes. And as mentioned earlier, in 2023, Geneseo student Rocio Ruiz created the podcast 32-23 to memorialize Kelsey and Matt and bring more community engagement to their story. And I just realized what that title means. Her number was 32, and I bet you his number was 23.
I was just thinking that too. At first, I thought it was going to be like their apartment numbers or something, but they're. Oh.
Now, her commitment to focusing on who Kelsey and Matt were as people and not just the tragedy that killed them really allows listeners to get a full-bodied view of these talented and kind athletes, and we rarely get to see this in true crime shows. So I highly recommend that our listeners check it out. It's really an extremely moving tribute to the two of them.
Oh, that's really nice.
Yeah.
And now, a brief word from our sponsors.
So I want to turn now to a discussion on mental health and dating relationships. While we've covered several cases of domestic violence on this show, and probably more than we can count on women in crime, one of the reasons that Kelsey and Matt's story stuck out to me is that this case really falls into a gray area.
Okay.
Because as far as we can know, there was no, quote, active abuse or violence happening between Colin and Kelsey until Colin committed the murder-suicide. While most domestic violence cases follow a clear pattern that usually moves from isolating the victim to verbal and emotional manipulation, then establishing control through fear, threats, and gaslighting, Kelsey's case appears a bit different. According to friends and family, she didn't make excuses for Colin's behavior, nor did she try to hide the unsavory parts of his personality from any of her friends or family. There was no point where she displayed fear or anxiety about Colin, even after he threatened suicide. Now, by all accounts, she was so unconcerned for her own safety that she called in a support system for him, but continued to stick to her boundaries. She also never socially withdrew from peers or families, and in fact made a point to tell Colin that she was not going to let him take her time when she realized what he was doing. We can't know what was going on with Colin, but from what Kelsey's friends and family explained in their interviews, Colin didn't display the usual red flags of abuse. No one found him to be particularly possessive or jealous, as Kelsey had maintained platonic friendships with other men during her 4 years at school.
Oh, that's interesting.
He also didn't pressure Kelsey to do anything quickly, like move in together, get married, or share finances. He also was not belittling or insulting to her.
Okay.
But as I mentioned before, we can still see a pattern of emotional control. Now, if you recall, he had cheated on her and then begged for forgiveness until she gave in and took him back.
Right.
And after their second breakup, some information alludes to the fact that he made her feel bad for breaking his heart. Now, we can't know exactly what he said, but whatever it was, it made Kelsey feel guilty enough to consider taking him back, even though she knew at this time that they were not a good fit together. And then lastly, of course, he threatened to kill himself if she didn't stay with him. And when that didn't work, he escalated to murder.
I mean, that's the big red flag there, too.
That's a huge one. So, even though there weren't necessarily the signs that he was an abusive boyfriend, there definitely were some flags that point to some level of coercive or controlling behaviors. And I think in some ways, this case is all the more troubling because it seemed like nobody could see it coming. I think when we hear these kind of stories, people like to be able to point to signs that were missed or ways that we can prevent these things from happening. And I guess in this case, it doesn't seem as obvious as maybe some other cases of murder-suicide.
I don't think it's as obvious for sure. And I think some of the ways you described, it seems like Kelsey's behavior is outside of the norms of what we hear. However, I did hear the risk factors, and I did hear, I heard of a guy who was definitely seemed emotionally manipulative, too dependent. He did try to isolate her. So when we say monopolizing her time, that's him trying to isolate her. And then once he's detached, he's dropped out of, it sounds like, college. So his social bonds are weakening. She's becoming his whole world. Now he's threatening suicide. I'm not saying someone should have been like, oh, this guy's clearly going to commit this unthinkable act. However, I do see escalating signs there that point to something brewing and some possibility here.
Yeah. Now, I know you recently covered, maybe not too recently, but on Women in Crime, you covered a murder-suicide case, right, Rosaria?
Yes.
Do you see parallels? Because I couldn't recall a murder-suicide case that I covered on Women in Crime, but Phil Hartman, Bryn Hartman. But that was years ago, so it might be fresher in your mind, the Rosaria case. Do you see parallels at all?
I do, actually. So in that episode, for anyone who doesn't listen to Women in Crime, I'll just tell you, we talked about the typical motives where people who commit homicide and suicide lie. And so there's a couple typologies. One of them is like a perpetrator perceives it as an act of mercy. So like the older patient, an older couple kind of committing this act together as like an act of mercy, and not always together. There's a second typology that also revolves around the perpetrator's feelings of obligation towards the victim. So the perpetrator might experience hopelessness and feel that he or she might be bringing stigma upon this person. So it's better that they both die. And then there's the third group, which is what I was talking about before, a significant negative dynamic. All right. And this is a group that could be, it could be abuse, it could be infidelity, or perceived injustice. And so this is a person who is typically jealous or overdependent on the victim. This person can't accept change if the change is the loss of that relationship, because their identity is tied heavily to the loss of the relationship.
That seems relevant here.
Yes. And this could be the result of a long pattern of control, abuse, obsession, possibly. So I think that is relevant here. And I think that parallels the motives of Rosaria's husband a little bit as well from what we knew. I want to point out, too, that I also covered a case. I don't know if you remember this one, Janair Gerardo and Mark Gerardo.
Wait, didn't we interview him?
Yes, I interviewed Mark Gerardo for the case.
Oh, yes, I forgot about that one.
And in that one, it was a little bit different. It was interesting because Janair had taken the life. She killed his girlfriend, who he was leaving her for, and then she took her own life. And that was different because in that case, that was very much about making him suffer, about making him suffer in the long run. So there are different motives, and men and women tend to be different in these acts, the way they perpetrate these crimes, the motives. But those two cases came to mind. But I do think in this case, it was the negative dynamic, him losing her, loss of the relationship. She's moved on. So there's a couple of things here. It's definitely revenge. It's also, if I can't have you, nobody else will. And we will all, leave, I guess, unfortunately.
It's just so tragic. And, that leads us to the question, like, is this or was this preventable? And it's hard to say whether it was or wasn't. But what we have here are 3 young adults who lost their lives, 2 to horrific murder and 1 by his own hand.
Right.
And, to that end, I think it's important to give some action items because we do have a lot of college-aged listeners on this show.
Yeah. And you know what? Sorry. College-age listeners and also their families, their mothers. We know people, college parents of people in college who listen, so they can also.
That's true. If you or anyone you know is struggling with suicidal ideations, the National Suicide Prevention Hotline is available 24/7 in both English and Spanish by calling or texting 988. Their website also has a chat function for anyone who prefers talking that way, and the chat can be found at 988lifeline.org. And for anyone who might be in an abusive relationship or know someone who is, we urge you to check out the National Domestic Violence Hotline at thehotline.org, where private calls, texts, and chats are available 24/7 in both English and Spanish. Now, I hope that by covering Kelsey and Matt's case today, we were able to bring more attention to the wonderful people that they were and to provide some resources on red flags to look for that may not be as noticeable in potentially abusive relationships.
Yeah.
And I want to pause for a minute and say that, as I was researching this episode, I wanted to close out by saying, by talking about the legacy of Kelsey and Matt, because they were the victims here. But I think it's also important to acknowledge that although Colin did murder 2 people, and he is clearly the offender here, I also think this is somebody who was struggling and suffering from mental health issues himself. And I also think that it's a tragedy. It's a tragedy all around because Colin's family and friends also lost a loved one.
They're also victims and they feel the effects of this, even if he was the perpetrator in this case. It's not always so cut and dry.
Yeah. And while nothing can bring back any of these individuals, if we continue to talk about their stories and ways to prevent this kind of tragedy from happening again, that's one of the best ways that we can keep their legacy alive.
Agree. Thank you, Amy.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for listening today, and we hope that you will join us on the next episode of Campus Killings. Before we go today, if you'd like to support Campus Killings, consider subscribing to the show with an AbJack Insider subscription through Apple Podcasts.
Your subscription will get you VIP access to all the shows on the network that not only includes hundreds of episodes of ad-free listening, but also bonus content and early access to episodes. For only $4.99 a month or $49.99 a year, you'll unlock a variety of listener benefits, and you'll be supporting this show in the process.
Head over to Apple Podcasts and search for either Campus Killings or AbJack, and you can start your subscription with a free trial.
Your support is greatly appreciated.
Campus Killings is hosted by Dr. Meghan Sachs and Dr. Amy Shlosberg, with research and writing by Abagail Belcastro. It's produced by Mike Morford of AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to follow Campus Killings on social media. You can find Campus Killings on Twitter with the handle @CampusKillings or on Facebook at facebook.com/Campus Killings. You can also visit the show's homepage at campuskillings.com. Be sure to tune in every other Saturday for new episodes of Campus Killings.